Um, there are a bunch of new faces in the room from last night, and so I want to just say a few introductory words about what we're doing over the next 2 weeks and what Real Matter is, and then introduce the moderator tonight. My name's Matt Griffith. I'm an architect at In Situ Studio, which is a really small, weird architecture firm in Raleigh. And about a year and a half ago, we had this idea to put on a workshop. We did the first annual workshop last summer, this exact same time, and we named that workshop Real Matter. The reason for that is that we wanted to basically create a space for conversations about what really matters in our city. And I think especially as architects, one thing that we're always frustrated with is people usually come to us and hire us to do projects after all of the big decisions are made. And you're just kind of hired to do the thing, right? And we really kind of wanted to front load the conversation and get designers, architects, non-architects, important thinkers in the room together, kind of talking about these problems and figuring out what we can do to make the future of the built environment in Raleigh better than it already is. I wanted to just take some time to talk about 3 things with the workshop, just so you can understand a little bit about what's going on. You guys are all here for a lecture series, which is a pretty straightforward thing. You know what that is, but the workshop might be a little bit of a mystery. The workshop part of things is we invite students from across the country and young professionals from across the country to come here for 2 weeks. They pay tuition. Those who aren't from here also pay for a room at the Longleaf Hotel for 2 weeks at a reduced rate. Thanks, Longleaf. What we do is for 2 weeks, it's a really intense design charrette where the students for the first week get to know the city. They identify things that aren't going great here. And then the second week, they propose what-if proposals for addressing those issues. We don't like to call them solutions because it's naive to think that we could solve anything in 2 weeks. But it's more just identifying things that could be better in Raleigh and figuring out what we could do about them. So the first group of people I want to thank tonight and identify are the Real Matter 2022 cohort. I've already told them I'm going to do this every night, so they're going to do this 7 times. They're mainly sitting over here. If you want to stand up and take a bow or whatever you want to do. We got the studio kicked off this morning. They've been all over the city all day. They're probably pretty tired. They have their first thing due tomorrow morning. So we're off to the races. But we really appreciate you guys being here. You're the reason this is happening. We also, the first year, realized we probably needed some sort of a curriculum for the workshop attendees. In addition to us and other people who are good design critics and thinkers being in the studio with them on a daily basis and helping them through the project, we thought it would be nice to have basically some sort of a course of lectures. And we started by reaching out to people around here who we thought could come in and give talks about different topics, but it pretty quickly became apparent to us that the community here, both the design community and the larger community, were hungry for a really robust design lecture series in the summer, of all things. And so we kind of transitioned to raising money from competitor offices, all kinds of different people, to basically be able to bring in outside lecturers. So the first 2 nights that we planned last year and this year focus on kind of local topics. And last night, Jonathan Melton did a great job presenting some of the key initiatives that the City of Raleigh is working on in regards to transportation and housing and food insecurity and all kinds of issues. And then spent even more time answering questions, like Tony Blair on the floor of House of Commons, if you've ever watched that on C-SPAN. It was a really good night. And tonight, we're really excited to have a panel of local kind of thought leaders, each of whom has some area of interest or expertise, and that kind of overlaps with a problem that we know our city has. So the first 2 nights were intended to be local, and then the remaining 5 events, which are on the poster that probably all of you have seen a million times at this point, are outside architects. And we have architects from New York, San Francisco, and Mexico City, and Winnipeg, and Toronto coming in to present different things. I promise these aren't just like boring architects who design buildings. We worked really hard to find people who have innovative practices that in some way address some sort of important social issue. We also have one landscape architect, one architect who's more of a graphic designer, an architect who focuses on social inequity and racial inequity and how design can address those issues. So we really hope you guys will come to the other events or come to as many as you can. We know that the people in our office are unique in the way that we can handle 7 events in 9 nights. We don't expect that from all of y'all. But come to as many as you can, because the longer and more sustained the conversation is with as many people as possible, the better this thing will go. So that really is what the lecture series turned into. It started out as a curriculum and it's turned into this kind of big public event. Because of that, I really do have to thank our sponsors. You've seen them kind of scrolling around. You've seen them on the posters. We have 27 people and companies who this year sponsored the workshop, either with in-kind donations or financial support, which is huge. And like I mentioned earlier, many of those people are rival architecture firms. It's like one of the most amazing things about being in the city is there's a robust design community. We all support each other. We all want to see each other do great things. And so it's absolutely amazing, the support that people have offered. So the last thing I want to do is kind of talk through who Jake is and introduce him. So our moderator tonight is Jake Heffington, and my introduction of him is going to be less like bio that you read off a website and more personal, because Jake was a student of mine a million years ago at NC State, and then worked in our office for 3 years. I think we convince you to stay for 3 years, and we all 3.5, long time. Yeah, worked on some incredible projects, many of which you guys have seen, including a house with a climbing wall, which is pretty cool, that we just had photographed. And I guess 2 years ago, almost exactly, left the office to start 2 things. One, a small practice that he has called And Other Works, that works on pretty much everything. And if you look at their Instagram feed, you will see that they work on pretty much everything. It's really fun. And then I think maybe closer to Jake's heart and very important to him, he also started a nonprofit called Diversify Architecture, which the name is self-descriptive. I don't have to say much about what you do once you hear that it's called Diversify Architecture. But he and the folks who help him lead it, and I think they're actually hiring right now, hired, that's awesome, today?
No, last week.
Oh, last week, okay. And a whole bunch of volunteers are working to kind of crack the code of how architecture as a profession can be more diverse. It is still probably the least diverse major profession that people have heard of that exists. And so they have programs all across the country, really, and especially up and down the East Coast, trying to get young people of all backgrounds into architecture. So we're really excited to have him here. Jake is going to be leading this panel tonight. He's done a great job organizing it. We are going to try to save time at the end for lots of questions. Last night the questions were great. Jake will say this again, but it's okay if we get a little feisty while we're in here tonight and ask hard questions and deal with hard topics. That's really what we want to be doing here. So we really appreciate all y'all being here. Hope you'll make it for subsequent nights, and I'll turn it over to Jake.
Hello. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. That's very nice. Fortunately, I'm the least qualified person on this stage by a lot, so there will be better things said than whenever I've got here. I've had the distinct privilege of working with these folks on the stage with me over the last few weeks, and I'm very excited about what they have to share and what they have to offer. Even more excited about the work that they're already doing in our city. The advice that they have, the thoughts and comments, the perspectives that they have are extremely powerful. And if you were wondering, you've made the right decision by being here. This is going to be awesome, hearing from them. I wanted to just quickly run through how this is going to work. So I'm going to introduce the framework for the evening, how we've kind of aligned ourselves over the last few weeks, and the themes that we've been focusing on to develop the questions and also the sort of commentary that everyone is providing. I'll then be introducing all of the panelists, and then you'll hear from each of them about their work in the city, their perspective on its transformation and on its recreation. This is loosely an architecture event, like Matt was talking about, but we are privileged to have 4 non-architects on the stage, which is very good if you're an architect, because you probably have no non-architect friends. So this is a good opportunity. You're going to learn some things about some of their disciplines, some other people doing really amazing work. We will have time for question and answer. I would encourage you, like Matt said, to bring really hard questions. The panelists can take it, I promise. And it's really the only way we're going to get any benefit out of tonight, is if there's some discomfort and discord, and we all kind of cringe a little bit when somebody says something that we're all wondering but nobody wanted to say. And for the panelists, I would encourage you guys to ask hard questions to one another as well as you guys are interacting throughout the course of the evening. So to think local is our task tonight. That's the title of this panel. We have to start by maybe just understanding what that means for us as a city, us as the Raleigh area, the Raleigh metropolitan area. Raleigh's the second fastest growing large metro area in the United States, right behind Austin. There's no signs of it slowing down. If you work in architecture, you're well aware of that. And that means that tonight we have a moving target if we're trying to think locally. Oh, it sounds really different. Yeah. Okay, it's good to know. Is this better, or is that echoey and weird? That's better? Okay, doing this, it doesn't, okay, all right. That means we have a moving target tonight. Raleigh today is not the same as Raleigh yesterday, and we can be sure that Raleigh tomorrow is gonna be altogether new. So, the issues that we're facing, the opportunities that we have as a city are rapidly evolving. They're becoming increasingly intersectional, and they're requiring more interdisciplinary approaches to understand, and especially for issues to be able to be addressed. For the architects and the urban planners in the room, we have a long history as a profession of starting to establish these ideals of sort of utopian society, trying to simplify this really complicated thing that happens when people try to live in the same place, down to a few values, a few economic principles, and a few sort of built ideals that we can implement, and then everything is going to be okay. Unfortunately, cities are extraordinarily complex. They're socio-technical systems. They get more contorted every time a new person enters the boundaries of a city, every time a new technology is introduced. So this strategy is just completely useless. So I would urge you tonight to avoid making that leap and trying to create that in your mind or start to solve the problems. In fact, I would encourage you, if you can mentally make this happen, to leave this evening with way more questions than you leave with answers, because this is complicated work. And I think what we're going to see tonight over the course of the panelists' discussion is that there are many, many facets with many, many issues that each individually have problems that are unsolved by the people who are working really, really hard on those issues. So tonight is not about finding an answer. Tonight is about broadening your understanding of this extremely complicated set of issues that we have as a city now and that we continue to develop as we grow. So tonight, embrace the sweaty mess that is complexity. It's complicated, and it hurts, and it's painful, and we never know the answers, but it's the right thing to do. There's another challenge that we have when we try to conceptualize a common local condition, and that's that your Raleigh is not the same as my Raleigh. My Raleigh is not the same as your Raleigh. The way that I treat Raleigh is different, and different than the way you treat Raleigh. The way that Raleigh treats you is different than the way that Raleigh treats me. We can be sure that within this room, there's a set of pretty broad perspectives, but that there's a massive amount of perspectives that are not represented in this room as well. A massive amount of Raleighs, of versions of Raleigh that are not represented in this room. So it would be insane to think that we could even come close to solving these problems anyways, because we have hundreds of thousands of people who have distinct ideas about what Raleigh is and what it needs to be. So how do we discuss a common local reality or a common local vision becomes a question. How do we bridge the gaps between our disparate understandings of the city? But maybe most importantly, how do we make everyone's version of Raleigh better simultaneously? That's an extremely hard question to ask. It's easy for those calling the shots to make their version of Raleigh better. How do we get everybody's version, all 400,000 people's version of Raleigh to be better simultaneously? So we've been discussing as a group, there's a civil rights lawyer named Brian Stevenson. He's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, author of Just Mercy, incredible speaker, worth checking out, go read his books, all of that. But he introduces this idea that he uses to sort of organize his work with the marginalized and the poor, and that is proximity. He says, it's in proximity to the marginalized that we hear things that we won't otherwise hear, that we'll see things that we won't otherwise see. The things we hear and see are critical to our knowledge and our capacity to problem solve. If you're willing to get close to people who are suffering, you will find the power to change the world. Mm-hmm. So having this conversation in this room, away from all of the actual challenges and all of the actual opportunities of the city, is not a solution or a proposal for a solution. The best that we can do tonight, and what we should do, is allow this conversation to be a spark, but know that the flame is dependent on our willingness to become proximal to those experiencing life in our city in all of its many, many, many forms. So this is our framework, really, for the evening. Think local, embrace complexity, and act proximally. So we're going to get started. I'm going to introduce the panel first. They've all done a lot of stuff, so this is going to take a minute. It's kind of embarrassing to put Matt's description of me next to theirs. I wish he didn't do that and just said I was Jake, but here we go. So first we have Dr. Terrence Ruth. He is a proud Raleigh change maker. He's a professor at NC State in the Department of Social Work, an active social justice advocate, and a mayoral candidate focused on building a stronger, more inclusive, and prosperous Raleigh for all of its citizens. He received his master's in educational leadership from Nova Southeastern University, his PhD in public affairs from the University of Central Florida. He has training in class analysis, educational policy, and the sociology of human development, which has led to his involvement in a number of community and civic organizations, and it is a number, it's a long list. Most recently, he's working with the United Way of the Triangle to create a $1 million community-centered solution investment strategy. I don't even know what that means, by the way, but $1 million is a lot of money, and that sounds important. His collaborators include Dr. James Forbes, Dr. William Barber, Dr. Cornell West, the Beloved Community, and a host of other amazing leaders in civil and social justice movements, which speaks volumes about the content of his values and the effectiveness of his leadership. He spent 5 years as an alternative education principal, which you'll hear a little bit more about tonight. Most recently, his work has been in human-centered design innovation, launching philanthropic strategies that utilize design thinking to center community leaders as change agents. We are thrilled to have Dr. Ruth with us this evening. Oh yeah, definitely. And then we have Anna Stokes. Anna is a practicing transit planner, currently working as the Wake Transit Program Manager at the NC Capital Area. This is a mouthful. I tried this before we started because it's the NC Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization in Raleigh. She recently relocated back to Raleigh from Brooklyn, New York, where she worked in planning for passenger rail systems from Washington, D.C. to Boston with the Northeast Corridor Commission. Anna holds a bachelor's in public policy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a master's in urban planning from Columbia University, where she also taught urban spatial analysis courses as an adjunct professor. She's deeply interested in the implementation of design and policy-based solutions which utilize community engagement, urban analytics, and technological applications to create more vibrant, resilient, equitable, and accessible communities. Anna believes in a future for Raleigh where all people have access to safe, reliable, and frequent multimodal transportation options, and has devoted her career to making that vision a reality. We are absolutely grateful to have your transit experience on the panel tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Next down the line is Mr. David Meeker, who has the rare designation of being a native Raleighite. You don't find many of those anymore. He's the founder of Carpenter Development, which has completed 15 development projects in the area over the last 15 years. That's hard to do. In 2008, he partnered with Trophy Brewing, which now has 4 locations, over 100 employees, and really good pizza. He's also a co-owner of Elm Partners Commercial Brokerage, which helps local businesses find, buy, sell, and lease spaces in Raleigh. David's on the board of the Raleigh Chamber, the Downtown Raleigh Alliance, Common Cause North Carolina, Art Space, and the Dogwood Bank Advisory Board. He's also on the Capital Campaign Committee for Healing Transitions, which is a lovely detox and recovery center on Dix Park. David was previously on the board of Dix Park, North Carolinians for Redistricting Reform, and for the Raleigh City Museum. He is also an avid multi-marathon runner and lives in downtown with his wife and 2 boys. Thank you, David, for being here. And then last and certainly not least, we have Betty Murchison. Betty is a lifelong Wake County resident, mother and a wife, and a powerful community advocate in our city, truly. She's the founder of Oasis Health and Wellness Centers International, which provides culturally sensitive and holistic healing for both youth and adults. Lots of amazing programs. You should definitely check out that organization. She's a national trainer and consultant with the Nurturing Parenting Programs and the author of Nurturing Parenting Programs for African American Families. She received her bachelor's degree in political science and criminal justice from North Carolina State University, completing graduate studies at Harvard and Duke, and holds a certificate in nonprofit management from Duke as well. She's a fellow with the UNC Chapel Hill Emerging Leaders in Public Health program, as well as a fellow in the North Carolina League of Conservation Voter Boards and Commissioners Fellowship. She serves as a diversity ambassador with the Canadian Congress on Inclusive Diversity and Workplace Equity, and serves on the National House of Delegates Board for the People. She's a member of the Wake County Community Remembrance Coalition and the Raleigh Pilgrimage Planning Committee, a board member of Raleigh Organizing Against Racism, and the chair of Wake County Human Services Regional Community Advocacy Center Committee. I said that wrong. An amazing CV. We will hire you immediately. Thank you so much for being here, Betty. Yeah. So without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Ruth here to get us started. Flip to your image.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to share. It's an absolute honor to be able to have this moment with this amazing panel. So I was excited about the request to have to find a visual presentation for this concept of proximity. And the first thing that came to my mind was a bear. Yes, a bear. Now, it's often quite scary to enter the unknown, to enter communities where you would assume that your own personal values are not the same. Also, it would be a bear having to move into close proximity with others, especially others in underinvested neighborhoods. However, for this conversation, we're going to spell bear B-A-H-R, and we'll talk more about that later. Now, as a young school principal and a PhD that centered quantitative analysis, I was used to doing a structural equation model, an ANOVA, a t-test, a multiple regression. I was all too familiar with the data profiles of neighborhoods where my school was positioned. And you had high crime as one data set. In that high crime, students who attended my school had long juvenile and school suspension records. Now, my professional role told me that that data correlated to student attendance and their eventual class performance. Then you had high rates of poverty as a data point. Students who attended my school were often below certain salary thresholds. Many of them lived in a zip code where their career earning potential capped at 25,000 or below. Now this is their career earning potential just in a zip code. Now my professional role correlated that data to mean that I will have a certain number of qualified free and reduced lunch students. Then there was another data set around food deserts. Now, students who had limited access to healthy food sources fit in that category. You had a system that trained me that said that this food desert, this lack of access to healthy foods correlated to a level of parent involvement, to a quality of life, or to eventually their low performance in the classroom. And then I want to also not skip, and you'll hear more about it in the next presentation, but public transportation dependent. So we had students who relied overwhelmingly on public transportation service or short range car dependent mobility. So with again, my lens is correlated to long trips on a school bus because they had to be bused to a better school or bused to a better neighborhood. So these students spent hours on a bus. This also correlated to the difficulty that some of their parents had in attending after-school programs or teacher conferences. Now, in the same community where transportation is a problem, you also had a lack of bike lane infrastructure and greenway access. So it's no matter what your profession, there's always a system of thought that dictates how you convert macro level data of vast geographical regions into cultural assumptions and stereotypes. No matter what your profession. I'm just telling you about my educator profession, what it told me that the data said about these particular neighborhoods. Now, I can go on, and as you can see, I was well prepared to overlay my macro educator data, science, and classism, stereotypes and assumptions on these vast geographical regions without proximity. To be honest, I was confident in the research I was reading. I was confident in the data that I had access to. More importantly, I was confident in the years of observations that I had through my career. That I consciously ignored the significance of the intimate, of the complex. You know, I did not even feel the urge to have to be in proximity. I call it macro arrogance, or the simplified life. It's simple to pull out a spreadsheet and run an ANOVA, a multiple regression, a t-test, because it's going to predict human behavior. And then me, I could stay separate, unique, intelligent, smart, observing from a distance. You know, in my PhD program, I spent more time in front of a computer than I spent in front of people. So as I just leaned into my macro arrogance, but that all changed when I ran into a bear. Now I want to just spend a short moment just to talk about my bear encounter. My family was in the market for bikes. Somebody recommended that we go to a black bike owner. He was a repairer. He repaired bikes. There was no website, it was just a Facebook page. So when we arrived, there was this open garage. There was a fan going left and right, if y'all remember those fans. It's going left and right. I don't know if it was doing any good. But it was a black man in the driveway in a chair with a wrench fixing a bike tire. And he was surrounded by hundreds of used and repaired bikes in his driveway. And he greeted us with a smile. He said, "Hello, I'm Bear," and that was his nickname, B-A-H-R. And he had this big black dog next to him. The dog name was Fannie Lou Hamer. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Fannie Lou Hamer, I encourage that you write that name down. That person had a significant role in our history.
She did.
And so we're walking around through the bikes, and we're looking for our particular bikes that we desired, and cars was driving by. You heard horns honking, you heard people waving, you had black and brown families picking up their order. You also had people trying their bikes out. This was a thriving market, an absolute thrill in the community. Now, my macro arrogance told me that this community was not interested in bike lane infrastructure. My macro arrogance told me that this community did not desire access to the greenways at all, just public transportation. So I noticed that there was some greenery, there was some green plants that was in abundance. I said, Bear, you have a little green thumb. And I think the word little sparked something, and he stood up and he wanted to show me that he had a big green thumb. So he walked us around his house, and by the time we got to his backyard, it was like a garden forest. It was greens upon greens upon greens. And he began to tell us how he participates in an organic, healthy food exchange network through the Black Farmers Hub that's here in Raleigh, and Fertile Ground that's here in Raleigh. Now again, my macro arrogance is telling me that this is a food desert. There's a lack of access to healthy resources or food. Again, I'm observing from a distance. It was this encounter with a bear that began my deconstruction of this macro arrogance and my passion for proximity and intimacy. Mm-hmm. From this experience with the bear, I choose proximity over simplicity because I choose to see myself in the communities I care about. I choose to see myself in the stories of those who live in each home. I choose to be in proximity because the law of proximity says that we perceive elements that are close together to be more related, familiar, and connected, more than those who are farther apart. Mm-hmm. So until you see your story in their story, until you enter proximity with the bear, with those whom you are designing or producing for, you risk the chance of ignoring the rich lived experiences and culture of amazing human beings. So I close with this. Choose proximity over simplicity by 1, building authentic relationships in the communities you are creating for. Number 2, co-create with people who have historically been overlooked.
Yes.
And then number 3, value or prioritize proximity, because without proximity, how many bears, B-A-H-R, are we overlooking? Thank you so much.
Wow.
Hannah, you're.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here as well, and I have a tough act to follow.
Yeah.
As Jake said, I'm Anna Stokes. I'm the Wake Transit Program Manager with the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. We usually just say CAMPO. And it's a regional government entity working to improve transit and transportation throughout the region. I have a background in multimodal transportation and transit planning, and I spent half my career in Raleigh and the other half in the northeastern United States, most recently working on passenger rail planning. I moved back to Raleigh in October, and I'm really happy to be working alongside a lot of amazing people here to help improve the region's transit network and so that it can better serve the residents. I wanted to start with these photos of streetcars in Raleigh because I think it's a really stark contrast to what we experience today when you think about transit here. And some of you may have known that Raleigh used to have a thriving streetcar network, but others may not. So the one on the left is taken from the Capitol building looking south down Fayetteville Street, and that's just all streetcars. I think there are a couple cars back there, but it's really a thriving network. The one on the left is, or your right, is also Fayetteville Street. I'm not really sure where it was taken. A streetcar system in North Carolina started in 1886. The cars started running on Christmas Day in 1886. And they ran for 37 years, being dismantled in 1933 to make more space on the roads for personal vehicles, which were really this new technology that everybody was embracing. So we dismantled the transit system and we invested all our resources in the car. And I'd like for all of you to kind of imagine what Raleigh would be like today if we had made a different decision. What if instead of burying the tracks and tearing down the overhead catenary, we had, as a city, invested in transit for a century and a half? What would the city look like? What would our land use pattern be? How would you get where you wanted to go every day? Instead of the bus system we have now, which is really trying to retrofit a land use pattern that was not designed for it. That's one of our biggest challenges. We can provide service, but if you're so far out that it's going to take forever to get where you want to go and there's not a direct corridor, it's really, really hard to retrofit. So what would your basic expectation for what your government should provide concerning transportation infrastructure be if we had been investing in transit this whole time? And as you think about that, I'd like to introduce the idea, for those of you who may not have heard of it, of the sociological imagination. So in short, sociological imagination is the ability to see the context that shapes your individual beliefs and decision making, to think critically about what you deem to be concrete rules for the way society functions, and to question it. In doing so, you can better identify and question various aspects of society as opposed to just passively accepting it as the way things are. I think we as a society need to have a better sociological imagination, as our current expectations about what government, I'm a government employee, should and can be, and how it can better serve people, are based on out-of-date ideas intended to serve the needs of past generations. And I was first introduced to the concept of sociological imagination when listening to an episode of the Slate podcast, What Next, that was talking about motherhood in the pandemic. And I found this very relatable because I'm a mother and my daughter was born in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. Record numbers of women have left the workforce since the onset of the pandemic, and many are struggling to return due to an inability to find childcare. And the Slate journalists focused on the idea that government-funded childcare, and they pointed out that Americans have settled into the belief that the government is only responsible for providing childcare for the ages of 5 to 18, something that it does through the public school system. However, the system was designed to meet the needs of families a century ago, about the same time that you could take a streetcar anywhere you wanted to go in Raleigh. We live in a different world now, and the US Census Bureau shows us that the majority of children are being raised in families where both parents work, or they have a single mother or a single breadwinner, and most families can't afford to have a parent stay home until their child is eligible for public kindergarten. So why have we accepted that there's no universal childcare or government-supported system up until the age of 5? If we used our sociological imaginations to push against what exists and think about what could be, would we expect more from our government in that situation? Of course, there's a lot of resistance to the idea of universal pre-K or subsidized infant care, but there is also widespread resistance to the idea of federally mandated public school for the age of 5 to 18 before it started too. And now, can you imagine living in a country or a society that didn't have public school from the ages of 5 to 18? Like, we can't even consider it. It would be a total shift from how we live and what we expect from our government. And I think the juxtaposition between refusing to provide care for children under the age of 5 and mandating care for children over that age is why this is such a good example of how using your sociological imagination to push against the underlying and often arbitrary rules of the world in which we live can result in needed societal shifts. But obviously, we're not here to talk about childcare and my expertise because I am not a childcare provider. I'm just a parent. I am a transit planner. So I would like for you to think and use your sociological imagination about Raleigh and the transit system that we have, and also the multimodal system that we have, where we have sidewalks, where we don't have sidewalks, where we have bus stops, where we don't have bus stops, how you can get from where you want to go, and how it could be different, because it really could. And let's revisit the questions that I asked before. So how different would the city feel if we had continually invested in transit? If we had replaced the streetcars with light rail or bus rapid transit, but we had kept those corridors that used to exist in the land use pattern that was there? If we had always had high quality, reliable, and frequent access to transit in Raleigh, could you imagine the government choosing not to invest in it and instead subsidizing personal vehicular owners and roadway projects as we do today? I don't think so, right? Like if we had this baseline expectation of transit, it would really shift how we thought about everything. So obviously this exercise does little to help us outside of the theoretical realm of imagination. We didn't continue the streetcars, and we don't have a very significant transit system. And instead we have spent the last century and a half investing in heavily in infrastructure for personal automobiles. So since the streetcars occupied Fayetteville Street like this, we saw it go from a broad boulevard with angled parking and narrow sidewalks in the 50s to an underutilized pedestrian mall in the 90s to what it is today, which is a great exercise for wide sidewalks and traffic calming, but it doesn't really provide any transit access. However, just as American families have shifted from keeping mothers home with the ability to care for their children until the age of 5, the people of Raleigh have also shifted in their needs, wants, and desires for better transit service. Our climate also demands that we find another way. Many, many people in Raleigh rely on transit every day to get where they want to go for a variety of reasons. Perhaps they can't drive because of a medical condition, or maybe their car broke down. Perhaps the cost of buying and maintaining a car is just out of reach and continues to be because they struggle to find sustainable employment that is accessible without it. City employees like myself are honestly working really hard to try and provide a transit network that serves the people of Raleigh. However, the system struggles to gain riders and retain riders once they have a better option because it struggles with reliability, with timeliness, with actually getting you where you need to go. What we need is a transit system that provides frequent transit every day, not just at peak times for 9 to 5 commuters. We need safe pedestrian bicycle infrastructure that connects riders from their homes to the transit stop and from the transit stop to their final destination. We deserve a transit system that helps get people to the places they love, the shops they frequent, their friends' homes, their child's school, and back as quickly and efficiently as possible through a variety of modal choices, that complexity that Jake was talking about. And that is what I'm honestly working on, and all the planners who work in the government around here are working on, but we really can't do it without the public. As many of you know, Wake County and the city of Raleigh optimistically voted for a sales tax in 2016 to fund improved transit service in the future. The tax set in motion a comprehensive and participatory planning process that resulted in a plan focused on achieving 4 critical things. The first is to connect the region. The second is to connect all Wake County municipalities. The third is to provide frequent and reliable urban mobility. And the fourth is to provide enhanced access to transit. The plan includes bus rapid transit, or BRT, which I am personally a really big fan of because it provides the benefits of rail through the implementation of a fixed guideway that's used only for the BRT buses and really nice stops that can feed into transit-oriented development without the cost to lay and sustain infrastructure for rail. Currently, 47 miles of BRT infrastructure are slated by 2030, the first of which is the New Bern corridor. I'm sure most of you have heard of, right? That's gonna run along New Bern Avenue, as the name suggests, from downtown east past Wake Med. There are also a northern, a southern, and a western corridor. So how can you help have transportation be better and have transportation fit your needs better? And this is where we get into proximity. So this is not a Raleigh example, but I lived in New Haven, Connecticut for a couple of years, and I worked as a transportation planner there, and I was focused mostly on bicycle and pedestrian work. And I was helping do some pop-up bike lanes. So it's where you take a road and you use your imagination and you think about what the road could look like if it actually had a bike lane. And you use cornstarch for the paint with food coloring, so when the rain comes, it washes it away, and duct tape for the lines, and the city lent us their actual traffic stencils for the bike lanes, and we painted them. And we had a series of open street festivals, and I was going to build the bike lane with some other volunteers with an advocacy organization. And a teacher who was in the organization suggested that we use his students from school to help us build the bike lane. And we went in and I talked to them about transportation planning and what it is in a very career-oriented, this is what you could be when you grow up type thing. And they helped build the lane. And one of the questions I asked, so he taught in the public school system, and it was a class that was for English as a second language student, and it was in a neighborhood that was heavily occupied by people who were not born in the United States and came from a lot of Latin American countries and spoke Spanish as a first language, and the class was mostly in Spanish, and once you spoke English well enough, you would move back into the full curriculum. And one of the questions I asked was, who rides a bike here? And nobody raised their hand. And then the teacher asked, who used to ride a bike where they used to live? And almost every student raised their hands. So they weren't not riding where they lived now because they didn't want to. They weren't riding because they didn't have access to bicycles. And so from that, we pulled in another guy who was involved in the organization who helped provide bikes through the bicycle co-op for the students who helped build the lanes. And it was this, I imagined I was building a lane for very planning purposes to show you what it's going to look like in a very academic way, and it turned into this exercise that benefited so many kids who actually got a bike out of it, who learned something, who had an amazing day, and it was that proximity that I feel like I got pulled into through no effort of my own, and it turned out so much better than anything I could have imagined, and it's kind of framed a lot of the stuff that I've done since, and the real need to have that type of proximate public engagement. But the planning process is not always like that. And so what I challenge you with is twofold. One, to understand the system that exists, because a lot of the change that you need to push through needs to be pushed through the system that's already in place. And two, to think about the system as it could be in the future and challenge it to be better. So the system that exists relies heavily on public meetings, on listservs, on surveys. So if you go to the city website, you can sign up under raleighnc.gov/transportation, get on the email list, and you'll get a notification anytime there's a meeting. And you can go and you can tell people what you want and what you want to see in transportation, and they listen. I have spent a lot of time in my career quantifying the results from those things and putting them into plans because people really want to build a system that serves you. If you see a survey cluttering your inbox, fill it out because, again, we use that data. But two, push back on those processes. How can the city and the planning processes that govern the transportation structures that you use every day serve you better? How can you participate better? Push back on the city. Do you not go to the meetings because you don't have childcare? Push on the city to have childcare for you. Are there better places to have people give surveys and talk to you about transit? We go to festivals and transit centers often. I've done surveys on buses, but what about your school events? Would you rather see the city handing things out through your church newsletter? Things like that. If you suggest things to the city employees, honestly, that's going to feed into the system and help change in the future. And as you provide this feedback in the planning process, you have to understand too that it's slow. Really, unfortunately, very little of what I've spent in my career is in the ground yet because it takes a very long time. So the transit tax passed in 2016 and we're just seeing construction about to start on the first BRT corridor in 2022, right? So that's a 6-year turnaround for construction to start on this project. It takes a long time, so just because you don't see something happening when you say something, it doesn't mean we're not listening. So keep voicing your concerns, be present, push for what you need because people want to see it happen. And so I want to tie this all together in maybe the nerdiest way possible with a quote from David Harvey's Right to the City. And he says that the right to the city is a far more than an individual liberty to access urban resources. It is a right to change ourselves by changing the city. It is, moreover, a common rather than an individual right, since the transformation inevitably depends upon exercise of collective power to reshape the processes of urbanization. The freedom to remake our cities and ourselves is, as Harvey suggests, one of the most precious yet most neglected of our human rights.
Okay, that was incredible. And I'm a huge fan of BRT too. I definitely don't feel qualified to be on this stage, so I'll try to keep it short and not screw it up. As Jake mentioned, I grew up about a mile from here in Raleigh. Went away to school in Houston, Texas, and then came back because of all the opportunity here. That says something about Raleigh and how lucky I was to be born here. I do 3 things career-wise. I'm a partner in Trophy Brewing, which is the fun side of what I do. And we have 2 locations and 2 sister concepts, including a distillery. So we make small batch gin and vodka. So that's even the more fun part. And then I started and I'm CEO of a development company, Carpenter Development. We do what we call creative retail. So far it's been mainly adaptive reuse, buy an old building, renovate it, lease it out to yoga studios, restaurants, coffee shops, that kind of thing. And we're starting to do some new construction too. And then last, I'm a partner in a commercial brokerage, so we help folks buy, sell, and lease space. So I spend about 80% of my time on that, and then save the other 20% for community stuff. And my company, the rest of the company does that too. And a couple community things that we do aren't really design oriented, so I'll touch on them quickly, and then I'll get into a few design oriented things. We've worked on ending gerrymandering, which is where politicians draw the districts to usually skew them their way and make the election less competitive. We've worked with Common Cause on that to file lawsuits against unfair districts with some success. We've worked with Moms Demand Action on ending gun violence. Not a lot of success there, but we're still in the fight. We've raised some money for the LGBTQ Center through our annual Run for Love 5K. Just did it last month and raised $30,000 for them. Yeah, feel great about that. And then lastly, we've been involved with the Healing Transitions expansion. That's the free detox and recovery center on Dix Park. Really unique to Raleigh. Most cities like Raleigh don't have a place like that, where if you're struggling with addiction, you can walk in the front door for free and stay for up to 15 months as you get your life together. Just incredible. But we've also done some design-related community things, which I think this group will be more interested in. And one of those is sort of shown in the picture here. So we were on our individual projects. We try and do what we feel is the right thing, and that's sort of helping Raleigh become a more bikeable, walkable, transit-oriented city. So what can you do on an individual project level? You can renovate an old building. You can get rid of all the surface parking on your lot, which we did. The lot behind us is not ours, that's a state lot. And then you can add a bunch of bike parking spots. So we have 0 car parking spots on our lot, and we have 30 bike parking spots. Well, pretty quickly you realize you spent time, you spent money, you thought you had a great idea, and you haven't changed the city at all, because it's just one project of 1,000. So that we really needed to get involved on the policy level to have a bigger impact. And so we've worked on 3 things. The first one was getting rid of the minimum parking requirement that used to be the norm in the city, where if you were developing a project, for example, a brewery, the city would come in and say, okay, you're required to have 20 parking spots. For most of us who can't afford to build a parking deck, that means surface parking. And that takes up valuable land where there's not another cool business. And it really breaks up the walkability and bikeability of a city and doesn't encourage folks to find another way to get to you if it's so easy to park. So sort of a national movement was building around that for cities to get rid of that parking requirement. We got involved locally along with hundreds of other folks, first lobbying the city council to get behind it, and then once they did, providing cover for the city council to make this big change, because there are plenty of folks in town who did not want that change to happen and really enjoy the suburban drive everywhere, non-equitable sort of model. And that's sort of a fight that we feel like we've won. That was passed 3 or 4 months ago. That'll be a slow win because projects takes years to happen. But in 8 or 10 years, I feel like that thing changing could have just a huge impact on where Raleigh goes in and the walkability and bikeability of our city. I'm so excited about that. The second thing we did was work on the bus service in Raleigh becoming fare-free. This was based mainly around an equity sort of push. Most of the folks riding the bus now are riding because they have to, can't afford a car, and they ride it out of necessity. So why are we charging our most vulnerable folks $1.25 a trip, $2.25 a day, $50 a month, $600 a year, when we could make a small adjustment in property taxes and cover it pretty quickly? So we got a group together, the chamber. I don't know if that's surprising or not, but it was surprising to us. We have a wonderful chamber. They were very supportive. All the universities in town, lots of nonprofits that were paying for their clients to come to them, kind of crazy. We formed a coalition, and we were working on it just before the pandemic. Well, lucky pandemic hit, and the buses went fare-free because they didn't want germs being spread on dollar bills. And so we had an easy win then, and then the challenge was, how do we keep them fare-free going forward? And we've just gotten it approved for another year, but it's an ongoing battle, and that we all have to fight if we want it to be fare-free. And of course, when it is fare-free and you're not in a pandemic, there are all these additional benefits other than the equity piece, and that's that the bus actually moves faster because there's not the pay delay. People aren't paying when they get on. Hopefully more folks will ride because there's less barrier to entry. If more folks ride, we have less congestion on the roads. We're a greener city, and actually some federal funding is based on how many people ride. So potentially we could make up the funding gap without even raising taxes just from federal funding. So we feel like that's sort of a midterm win, but a battle we're going to have to fight every year. And the last thing that we've worked on is pretty much every city Raleigh's size has a highway running through the middle of it, breaking up the walkability and bikeability and safety of it. In Raleigh, it's not exactly a highway, but we have Dawson and McDowell running through the middle. People are driving 40 miles an hour. The lights are synced up. It's 4 lanes at some point, and it's just really unsafe. 2 people have died in the last couple of years. 2 pedestrians have died. And the DRA, the Downtown Raleigh Alliance, has these pedestrian counters, and a lot of people don't walk across those streets. They literally, on their morning walk, will get to the edge and turn around because it's so unsafe to cross. So we've worked with the North Carolina DOT, who controls those roads, to slow the roads down, reduce the lanes. We didn't get down to 2, but got down to 3, and then screw up the light syncing so that people can't race through. And the goal is to get 40% of the traffic going around town instead of through town, which is the percent that are cutting through. The other 60% are actually coming to town. And so those changes are going to go into place over the next 6 to 9 months, and hopefully downtown Raleigh, after those things are passed, will be a much safer, pedestrian place to walk. And those are the wins. And I'm not going to talk about the losses because we'd be here for an hour. But we've been working on a lot of other things that we haven't been quite as successful on, and we'll continue to fight for that. And I'll sort of close with this: is if you're not choosing to go the route of being on a nonprofit or working for a nonprofit or not going into politics, that doesn't mean you don't have a role to play.
That's right.
And I feel like so many people leave it to the nonprofit leaders and the elected officials to do it all. And that feels really unfair to me, on them. And so, so what we've tried to do is spend 20% of our time being helpful and doing our part. And I would encourage all of y'all to do that too. And I'll just say how easy it is to get involved, because I think that's an important piece. For instance, I'll take gun violence. Like when we've gotten involved with those events, we did a few what I'd call grassroots organizing events. Nothing special, a few beers, people getting together, maybe having coffee with a few people, and pretty soon you're in the middle of the fight, marching with a bunch of moms and hopefully changing the world for the better. And you know, if Raleigh is really the next Austin or the next Nashville, you know, we can all be a part of that, and that feels like a big deal to me, and hopefully feels like a big deal to you. So.
Change my traffic pattern. I will not be coming through downtown. Could have just told me, David. You know we're friends. Go around the Beltline. Thank you all for being here tonight, sticking with us. I want to thank Jeremy and Jake and all of the sponsors for tonight's event. This was when I got a call to speak to a group of architects. I'm like, what? So I love your idea and your energy behind bringing in community members. One of the goals that they set when they first asked us to be on this panel was to address problems and opportunities that Raleigh faces as a city. Well, you know, that's something everybody can get behind, right? And I thought, okay, I can follow this goal. So I'm going to take you on a little journey. I asked you to go along with me. The speakers before me did some of the similar things in having you imagine. So using, what is it, the right side of your brain? So let's work on that side. Let's imagine some things. Let's imagine that you live in a community and there's some ponds around you, and you get up to go walking in the morning and you see a couple of dead fish laying outside the pond. Any of you ever been to a groundwater or a Racial Equity Institute training? You've heard this analogy before. But if you see a dead fish, one or two fish, you just probably think, well, you know, it's just a fish that decided to leave the pond, or it just wasn't nurtured properly, didn't have enough nutrients in the pond for them maybe. So no big deal, you keep walking. But let's say you come back the next week and half of the fish in the pond are belly up dead. Now that would stop you in your tracks, right? You'd have to stop and ponder what's going on with this. Why are half the fish in this pond dead? And let's imagine that you have 3 or 4 other ponds in your neighborhood, and you start to notice that there are other fish dead in these ponds. Well, first of all, you probably will think, well, maybe it's not the fish fault. The pond must be toxic. There must be something in the pond that's causing these fish to die. If it's more than one pond or more than one lake where there are dead fish, you got to know it's a deeper problem, right? For those of you that are architects, groundwater. You know about the groundwater wherever you're designing or building something. That's a very important concept. So if the groundwater is toxic, it's going to poison the fish in every pond, right? So think about this. Think about those fish being our children, that in every pond represents an institution. So let's say one is education. Half the fish are floating belly up dead. Let's say the other one is the criminal justice system. Half of the fish floating in the pond are dead. Let's say one is healthcare. We talked about health disparities after COVID because suddenly a bright light was shone on it and people could see that there are health disparities in our communities. And let's say one was child welfare. And the same problem was affecting all of the fish in the pond. And if you ever go through Racial Equity Institute's groundwater workshop, it's a 4-hour workshop, I highly recommend you take it. They do a much better job than I did in explaining this. This is what racism looks like. It's the groundwater that's toxic, that's poisoning all of the systems. So we have different names for the different disorders, you know, whether it's disparities or inequities, but it's all the same. It's all the same. So when we talk about how this shows up and how it impacts the lives of people in communities, and sometimes the people in the community aren't even aware of how it impacts their lives. One of next on the next slide, one of the graphs that we use shows the difference between equality, equity, liberation, and reality. So instead of just going through each one, I'm going to give you a case study. This case study is an actual story, and it does involve transit, but we're not knocking transit tonight. But it's just to show you that unless you're proximate to the problem, you really don't understand it. So I had a client, I was doing life skills coaching for a client who was in a recovery house. She wasn't at there's a transition place for women, but at this time, this was pre-COVID, she was in a recovery house out Falls of Noose Road, which is out North Raleigh. She was required to spend an hour with me every week in order to be able to get her child back, and she was trying to keep a job. She was trying to, get her life back on track. So her reality, what her life started as is more of the picture to the left. She started in a ditch, right? Because she had everything against her. She had been in every one of those ponds. She had been in criminal justice. She had a record because she was using illegal substances. She probably had had problems in the education system. She had healthcare issues, and she was in the child welfare system because her son, I think it was son, had been taken away from her, and they were giving her a chance to get her life back together, to spend, I think, 9 months in the recovery house so that she could get everything back together. Well, the organization, the nonprofit, gave her a bus ticket and told her to come see me. I was working out of an office off Capitol Boulevard, about a mile south of Triangle Town Center. Well, it took her an hour. It took her an hour to get from Falls of Noose Road out downtown, and then an hour to get from downtown to my office, to spend an hour with me, and then reverse the trip, an hour back downtown to the substation, and then an hour back home. That's 5 hours, right? Her whole day. It took her whole day just to see one. And usually when people are in these circumstances, they have 5 or 6 different agencies or organizations or counselors or therapists that they have to see. Because I didn't do substance abuse, and she had to go through substance abuse or substance use disorder with somebody. So if she started out, if her reality was that she was already in a ditch, giving her the bus ticket, where would that move her to? What do you think? Equality, right? Because she could get there. She had transportation. She could get to the office to see me. What would it take to move her to equity? You see the difference between equality means each of these kids get a stool or a crate so they can see the game. Did it help the little kid in the purple? Not at all, right? Equity is the tall kid didn't need a crate. Give the middle kid 1, but give the shortest kid 2. Then they all get to see the ball game. So what would equity have looked like for this particular client? A car would be great. But once you start talking money, people lose their minds. Oh, yeah, car. No, oh, no. What about if we gave her a Lyft ticket or Uber or Lyft so that she could drive there the same way you and I got here tonight? Was probably, we drove, right? Give her a Lyft or an Uber ticket, and they had plenty of money. It was a $7.3 million grant. They gave $4 million back. And that's when my hair started turning gray. I swear I had black hair at the time. You're gonna give $4 million back with all the people with substance problems? And she could have given them a car, right? Oh, Lord. So equity would be giving her Uber or Lyft credit cards or tickets or whatever you call it, so that she could take probably 20 minutes to get from Falls of Noose to Capitol Boulevard, 20 minutes back. She even could have probably told them stop at the grocery store or stop and let me buy some shoes or whatever. Liberation would have been what? Well, the problem was there are 5 or 6 women in the house, and each of them probably had 5 or 6 providers. And they have to vote on who can come into the house, which is great, because you should feel ownership of the house. And just because I'm providing a service doesn't mean I should have the liberty of coming into your abode. So I respected that. But what about, how have we been doing business the last 2 years? Virtually. Why couldn't she use her smartphone in her bedroom or in the closet or on the deck of the house, using her smartphone, let me have my 1-hour session with her, and she could sleep the rest of the day? So you see, sometimes we're only limited by our creativity, and it's not a matter of money. This didn't have anything to do with money. And we understand the transit system is a Goliath, and it's gonna take time to get all this sorted out, as Anna said. Meanwhile, in between time, she needed to complete her work so she could get her kid back. We waited on public transit, the kid would be in college. So it's not the solution to everything, but public transit needs to know about stories like this so that when they are making plans, they will understand that it's not just a drive down the center of town and drop people off. And that's why businesses can't get employees now. A lot of it has to do with transportation. I've worked in the restaurant industry before, so if I get on the bus and it takes me 2 hours to get to work, and I get there and nobody's eating out that day because the state fair is going on or whatever, and then my boss is gonna say, you gotta go home. So then I've got 2 hours worth of work. Even if it was $15 an hour, that's $30. And then I gotta go back home 2 hours. So you see, it's never as simple. Jake talked about the complexity of things. Things are never simple. So I tell people, don't say folks don't want to work. They want to work. Childcare is an issue. We were talking about that earlier. Transportation is an issue. Look at the whole picture. Get proximate to the problem so you can really learn and listen and hear what's going on. So if you're interested in continuing your journey, because for many of you, this is a journey, I want to let you know that there are organizations in town who are doing the work, have been doing the work. Raleigh Organizing Against Racism, also known as ROAR. And I think we have a couple of folks here. If you'll raise your hand so people can see who you are. A couple of us here tonight that represent ROAR. We offer these workshops, the groundwater, then there's a phase 1 and a phase 2. Both of those are 2 days, and either Quetta and I can help direct you toward, and we'll have some contacts on the last slide that you can take a picture of if you're interested in joining us on this journey. The Encouraging Place is another place. They offer supper clubs and lunch huddles and book clubs so that you can sit in company with people who don't necessarily look like you or who don't live in the same neighborhood you live at. And over at a potluck, you can talk about that. Any Encouraging Place folks here tonight? Okay, all right. Well, she's the girl right there. I'm talking to her. She got it all going on. Raleigh Pilgrimage of Pain and Hope. This is brand new. You guys are some of the first people to hear about this. There's a Durham pilgrimage, and now Raleigh has been organizing for a year, about a year, right, to start our own pilgrimage. A group of us volunteers, all of us volunteers, will take you into some of the neighborhoods that you may not have been in before, and help you to understand the lived history of folks there and why there's so much pride and so much concern about the way the neighborhoods are changing. And so we have the opportunity for you to sign up, go with a group of 12 people over the course of a weekend. We'll show you, there was the first 4-year medical school in the country was at Shaw University. How many of you knew that? Okay, couple, all right. Some of my tribe here tonight. So it's important that you understand the lived history, and some of the buildings are still standing, some aren't. But we will share that with you. And some of the representatives from that organization is here tonight. Will you raise your hands or stand up? You can check them out. Carmen and Micaiah, and they will share with how you can get involved with that. And then finally, there's another pilgrimage being planned, and this is to the Equal Justice Initiative. We're going down to Montgomery to that museum that is a commemoration of people who've been lynched. And there was one recorded lynching in Wake County, Mr. George Taylor, and a group of us are trying to bring that monument here to Raleigh and find a place for it so we can tell that story of this man who was murdered for no reason. And we invite you on that journey. We're all on this journey. There's so much that all of us don't know, and we work together, and we want you to join us if you're here, and connect yourself with somebody wherever you are. I thank you for this opportunity. I hope to see y'all on the road.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. We'll do you one better than taking a photo of the slide where they're going to send you an email with all of the links for things that you can sign up for. So I know you've ignored the last 35 emails they've sent, because I have. But this next couple are important, so read those. So we are going to open it up now to some Q&A. Is there a microphone that's going to get passed around? Is that the idea? Great. So Zach is going to be walking around. If you have something for one of the panelists, question, comment, concern, tomato to throw, whatever, just raise your hand and Zach will come.
All right, so first of all, can we get one more round of applause before we get into the question? So I think we're at 8:15, 8:20-ish right now. We are super invested in the conversation. So thankful everybody is here tonight. We want to make sure we get to your questions. I promised that last night, and I left some hands stranded. So I'm going to do my best. I got a working microphone. We're going to do this thing tonight. So I believe you had the first question, and we'll go from there.
Test, test. Yes, I ride a bike some, and I've really loved the improvements. And really, it seems like in the last 2 years, in the bike pathways up down Hillsborough Street through downtown, it really makes it a lot safer. And a lot of people don't realize that you can get on a bike, and I mean, they think I'm taking my life into my own hands. Right down Hillsborough Street. First off, there's nobody early in the morning. There's nobody even on the road hardly. It's really nice. I was wondering what are my father-in-law rode a train to Raleigh from Nightdale. So people don't even know that either. You jump on a train and come to Raleigh from Nightdale. I mean, that was a really strange thought when I first heard that. And then we've all seen the streetcars, or at least I've had a chance to see the streetcar images and kind of wonder what it'd be like. But, and I guess the rubber-tired version of that is probably what we're working on now. Charlotte has had some success with their rail system, and it was packed when I went on it. But what do you see is happening on transportation side, I guess, for what are the biggest things that are going to happen in transit probably in the next 5 to 10 years? From your perspective.
So there are a few things in the works. The BRT I already mentioned, so that's part of the Wake Transit plan. So we have BRT lines going north, south, east, and west, with potential extensions all the way down in Johnston County to Clayton and all the way west to RTP. There's also a lot of momentum behind what's called the S line. So the S line is an extension of the Amtrak spine that runs all the way from Maine to Florida, the whole way down the coast. And right now, the job that I have when I lived in the Northeast was DC to Boston. The distance between DC and New York is about the same mileage as DC and Raleigh. I could take a train when I was in New York from New York to DC in 2.5 hours. I think that trip would take you 7 or 8 right now from Raleigh to DC because of the shared network with freight, and just a lack of service and a lack of infrastructure. And the S line is working on that corridor from Wake Forest through downtown Raleigh out to Durham. It's the commuter rail frequency intercity rail frequencies. So that is something that I do not work with NCDOT, but that's something that they're really, really working on. There's also some ideas for a commuter rail line that would go from Garner, Clayton, Johnston County, all the way up through downtown Raleigh, out to Cary, out to Durham, which would also be a big thing for the area. So there's a bunch of stuff in the works, but as I said before, which was something that Jake nicely pointed out that I should mention, it's slow. So unfortunately, none of this stuff is something that's going to happen next year, but it's very promising where it's going, especially with the transit tax that we have that's actually investing money in transit specifically and helping to see those improvements. I'm hopeful that we'll get some kind of good rail service in the near future.
Hi, so this is a mixture of a question and a comment. And as the slides are merged together, this is what I saw as an elder who was born at St. Agnes and have lived here for 62 years. I'm ignoring the bear. But the proximity piece is very important, because what I believe is that if you don't sit in something, if all you have to do is drive through it or ride through it, you don't have any concept of what occurs in that community. And so a lot of times people who are planning, who are creating, don't sit in the community. So they don't, they're growing, their ideas are coming from what they see other places and what they hear from people who are not necessarily there. When I looked at the transit pictures, the thing that originally came to me was that the transit system was segregated. And I don't know how many of you know that. It was a great promise for those people who live in, I don't know what they're calling it now, Cameron Park. That was one of the draws, was that the transit system went through there. And there was at least 1 or 2 trolley cars that I know of that went down what was Smithfield Street, which you now know as Martin Luther King Boulevard. That was a draw for South Park when that area was being built. I'm a historian as well. And then when I look at Trophy Brewing, I think of when I was newly married, that's where I went to do my laundry. And so as we're planning, as we're building, what I'm seeing is like laundromats or washers and dryers going into apartments and things like that. But there's still community that needs laundromats built in it. And so as the communities are gentrifying, those things are being left out for those people who have had need of them and still live in those communities where there is still naturally occurring affordable housing in them. So we need to think about those things. And all of that equates to some of those fish that are dead in the pond. And so when Betty talked about the systems, we have to think about the fact that we try to fix the systems, but the systems are doing what they were created to do. And so we need to look at the history underneath that. And sometimes that means you need to go to talk to somebody who's 70 or 80 and find out what it was like for them before you build the new. And don't leave those histories out in the process of your sociological imagination.
I like that.
Because imagination is a wonderful thing. We all use it. We encourage our children to use it. But we also have to remember as adults that it's important for us to use it in every piece of our world today. Thank you.
Very well said, Connie.
All right. quick question. This is specifically related to transit, but I think it applies in lots of the different things we talked about. It seems in conversations where they do happen, specifically around transit, and I don't know if y'all are on Twitter, but it's not always a great place. But people talk about transit on Twitter, and it seems the conversation is between people who are irate that there are no bus stops or no benches, and people who are mad that the benches that we're installing are too expensive or the shelters are too expensive, and there's just kind of this squabble, which I participate in. But it seems like that's happening there, and then the other like 99.9998% of people aren't even talking about it, and that may be wrong, but it seems to me that we need to maybe pull people into conversation or enter into the more broad conversation so that we as a community kind of get some agreement. Do y'all have any advice on how to make that happen? Because it just seems like there's, again, the 0.111% are just, they both want improvement, but they just squabble, and again, myself included. But any advice on how to broaden the context of conversations of what we're talking about here as individuals?
I have no advice on that.
You don't have any advice?
Why don't you take that?
One thing that I would say, I'm not a Twitter user, but one thing I would say on that is that part of the reason that I'm very hopeful for the BRT improvements in Raleigh is because I think that BRT is a great investment for a community that is not sold on transit. As a community, we do not have people who have a baseline expectation for transit here. If you grew up in this area, you've never lived somewhere where you've been able to really rely on transit and have it be a successful thing that got you where you wanted to go with little frustration. Your experiences with transit are probably pretty negative. And because of the low cost, every infrastructure project is obscenely expensive. Because of the low cost of BRT compared to railway improvements and things like that, it's much easier to implement. Hopefully we can get people on board because they can see how successful a really good transit system can be, and then we can make some of those bigger improvements in things like rail. But I run into that a lot. There are a lot of people who are very, very skeptical, and then there are a lot of people who just want you to spend $1 million to get the Hyperloop or whatever it is that, yeah.
I just wanted to comment. I'm very active with affordable housing and getting people to vote and these things. I'm also 1,000 years old, so I started using Twitter, and I had to write David, and I asked him if he would let us register voters there, and he said sure, and that was so wonderful. But I commented because I bought Trophy Wife and Trophy Husband, and you get 4 cans of Trophy Wife. No, 6 cans for $9.99. You get 4 cans of Trophy Husband. And so I said, hey, David, you're for equality. What about this? He's really sweet. He says, I'll look into it. So then I get this young man, Herr Bierman, from Cary, who's 30 with a young son. And he jumps in and tells me, this alcohol content and the size of the can, all this stuff. And everybody who was a craft brewer aficionado hated me. But it was just sort of a fun conversation. But my point is, that young man, Herr Bierman, I said, why are you following me? I'm 1,000. You don't have anything in common. He said, I follow you for social justice issues. That's right. And because of that, we've gotten a lot of stuff done. So get on Twitter, pay attention, and find out what's going on.
Good point.
I want to comment briefly on Jed's statement. I left transportation to Anna, but there is there's an underlining question before you actually get to the category of transportation. So the research says voters engage based on their relationship to property. And then secondary to that, voters engage based on their level of education or education access. So engagement, to a large degree, is based on how we are championing or defining land ownership and land acquisition and land preservation, et cetera. So to Jed's point, how do we move that 99.9% that is not even worried about the debate into the conversation? And I think that's a conversation that we can have. Anna mentioned it in her conversation, but what does it mean for engagement to be dynamic, where it's not centralized, but it's actually embedded in community experiences? So when there's events, the city is there to engage and learn and observe from people who are living on the ground in that space, rather than waiting for a meeting. Most of our engagement is dynamic. We're collecting data. Organizations are collecting data from us. Just by us walking into a store, there's a certain store that's collecting data from us, just from our phone signal. But when it comes to city planning, we wait for a meeting. We wait for meeting notes. And that's sufficient. We don't even challenge that concept. We think it's okay. So to Jed's point, there is a crowd that is untapped data so that we can create a more responsive built environment that we don't even engage at all. So I'll leave the transportation in. But that is a piece, Jay. That was a really good question.
And it goes back to the pond analogy. We're steady fixing fish. We don't really want to look at creating ways with these institutions and these structures because they're working the way they want them to work. And so instead of checking the toxicity of the pond or looking at the groundwater, we're going to fix fish. And that's what a lot of nonprofits do. That's what we do. There are people who make a lot of money fixing fish every day and sending them back into the toxic pond instead of really getting to the root problem and looking at what's really wrong. Don't call me when it's time for election or time when you want to have a meeting, but you haven't come out to engage my community. And many marginalized communities are at the point like, don't even come my way. Nothing came of the meeting we had 5 years ago. You're not listening to me. I'm not a landed person. I don't have the things that you need to have to be heard in Raleigh. And y'all know that that happens everywhere. There are folks who are heard, whether they're on Twitter or whether they're coming to city council, they're heard, and there are other people who are marginalized. We got to fix that and not worry about fixing the fish.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to return to the idea of a sociological imagination. And so the crux of my question, I think, is related to that. How do you sustain this sociological imagination in the face of disappointment, right? So we're dealing with counterfactuals or hope in some sense, and it's easy, I think for me at least, to imagine initially the way the world could be. But when we get mired in bureaucracy or like the fact that taking public transit to my job would be like 6 times longer than driving, it's really hard to, I think, hang on to that. And so I'd love to hear from you for, yeah, there are disappointments that you probably haven't shared from the stage tonight. What has helped you to hold on to that imagination of where we could be going?
I would say ask the people who are impacted by it. If you want to know how I feel, come and ask me. Don't look at the data points. Data is important. I'm not anti-data, but as Terrence so well articulated, that's not the whole story. Until you get into the community, until you get proximate, you don't know. But often community people aren't asked to the table because they don't speak right or they might be angry. What you hear sometimes is just passion. But if you had to walk a mile in my shoes, you might be angry. So don't discount the wisdom and the knowledge that exists in communities that have been marginalized, because they can tell you what they want and what they need if you will go to them and with due respect. And you find out who are the decision makers in the community. And those are the people you want to definitely befriend and help them to understand. I'm not like the others that came before me. I come in peace, you know. I really want to know what you want. And here's what I'm going to do with it. Here's why I'm asking. And that's my 2 cents.
This is probably not the answer you're looking for, but what I tried to do when we were working on the fare-free bus service, I was sort of like you. It'd take me 6 times longer to ride the bus than drive. So it didn't feel right to be working on fare-free bus service and not riding the bus. So I'd ride once a week. So to make sure I knew what riding the bus was like and I could relate to it, and also found that it was actually convenient for me sometimes to ride it when other times it wasn't. So that was really helpful. And in that fight, that was an equity fight to save money for folks who didn't have money. You see every day on the bus the folks you're helping. And so just, that like reinvigorated you every time you rode. But you couldn't do it every day. It was a once a week thing, and so that helped me.
I'd say one thing that gives me hope from the transportation perspective is when I started my career, I had a couple jobs where this kind of speaks to what Jake does with Diversify Architecture, although I'm in planning and architecture. I had a couple jobs where I was often the only woman on the team and the only woman in the room, and I think part of planning not just transit systems, but probably designing good architectural projects and finding better solutions for affordable housing and speaking to the whole proximity thing. It's not just making sure that the community is heard and that you're seeing the community in person, but it's also having those people elevated and in the conversations on the professional level and making the decisions. And I see a change just in the course of time that I've been working is in a pretty big difference in the representation in the rooms where those conversations are happening. So I do think that there's a more diversity of voices. I'm usually not the only woman in the room. I had a meeting last week that was all women, and that was a really big deal for me. I'd never been in a transportation-focused meeting and had like no men in the room, and that's not the solution, right? Like it needs to be a diversity.
Works for me.
But when you talk about things like, going back to the childcare thing, a lot of reason why women don't use transit very much is because they're also doing those extra runs where they're going to the grocery store and they're dropping their kids off at daycare and all that kinds of stuff. And so if you have those voices in the room making those decisions, it can make a big difference in the trajectory of where we're going. And I think that helps the way things continually change. And we've backslid a lot, and that could be a whole other conversation, but in general, in my career in transportation, I do think that we're moving in the right direction, and it gives me a lot of optimism.
And first, the question was an amazing question. The sustainability of hopelessness in design and placemaking is a really strong question, especially for this season. So you're talking about 2 years where you had an epidemic, you're talking about a recession, you're talking about gas prices, you're talking about loss of jobs, you're talking about loss of life. I mean, you're talking about heavyweight stuff compacted in 2 years. And then on top of that, people are asking you to give to an election or to put your trust in them. I mean, it's a really good, it's a really good question.
Yeah.
So there's 2 things that that I've seen that's made me hopeful. The first one is there's a group of leaders and thinkers just based on their life experience, and age is not significant here, but I've ran into some who are aging and some who are young who just have a blank slate. They're ready to be courageous in this moment because they see opportunity. And I've run into several groups to say that has made me hopeful. So to say that hopelessness is not widespread across all groups, so that's one. But number 2, I've had the chance to actually be a student to community members like Carmen, who stood up. It's amazing how much we look at this time and we go, man, this time is crazy. But when you hear the stories of old Raleigh and how they have rebound, or our new word, been resilient in that moment, it's not even apples to apples. And so there's a history of people, we stand on their shoulders, who have marched through more difficult times than we are in right now. And it's just learning through, just being a student to these different leaders who hold that history that has made me hopeful in this journey. So no, thank you for your question.
That's a good point, Terrence.
This is more of a comment, but I know we talked about proximity tonight, and because it was one of the topics. But I also wanted to point out that a lot of what you guys spoke about was also engagement. And I just really wanted to, I guess, talk more to the architects in the room tonight, because it is a joke that, yes, we only have architecture friends, and but it's very true also for a lot of us. And how we spend so many nights, just working, and we're focused on the work, but, I think what we really need to do, and what I encourage a lot of the architects in the room and other designers, is to engage, because we learn who we are designing for, who we are trying to help. And so I really thank you for being part of this panel, and for letting us know of all these great organizations that we can take a part of.
Thank you.
And I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to tell everybody to get involved.
I'd like to start with saying another event like this tonight is to make an impact on the community. And with that being said, it's my understanding the media says that we spent $157 million on the light rail for the community. That, in my understanding, was mismanaged and was not very effective. And so Raleigh has imposed a tax for transit in this community. Could you give us some advice on how the community could make sure that that does not happen, that the funds are not mismanaged? So it's boots on the ground. How can this event here affect the community?
The light rail, he's talking about the light rail that was going to run all the way through to Durham. It got cut maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. The project was just ceased. There was a interesting article about it recently from Durham. Essentially, Durham is doing a very good job at pushing back on what happened in that situation. And basically asking like what happened to all the money that we spent on this project. We don't have a light rail, but we spent a ridiculous amount of money on this project. I think that one of the things that we can do as a community to help push against that is to weigh in on the planning process. Look at so I work on a long-range planning process. I was not working in this area when the light rail happened. I think we just need to keep pushing on people to do the right thing, and pushing on people to make sure that your interests are served. The light rail was dead before it was dead, and it kind of kept going. And now there's all this stuff coming out about it. I don't have a good answer. It's a really hard question.
Ms. Stokes, could I support you?
Please.
Could I support you in responding to this very good question about what happened to over $150 million spent on trying to study and figure out whether or not we could have light rail in the region, one of the fastest growing regions in the country, and then all of a sudden we put the kibosh on it? Okay, let's just take a step back, take a beat for just a second, right? First of all, that light rail conversation was happening between Durham County and Orange County, right? So for those who may not know, I know we've got some young people here in the audience from across the country who may not know. You're basically talking about Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Durham, North Carolina. And we're not here to point fingers, but we're just talking about the facts. So, as I understand it, and for those who may not know, my name is Nick Neptune. It's good to be here with all of you. All right. Great to see you again. I have had the privilege of serving with an organization called Wake Up, Wake County. Okay. And through work and service with Wake Up, Wake County, which since 2006 has been an advocate for smart, sustainable growth in our region, whether it's housing, transit, etc. You know, that's the nature of the work of the organization, and I'm deeply grateful I've been a part of that. So from that work, I'm sharing with you what I learned. And the long and the short of it is, between Durham County and Orange County, and their various county commissioners and planners, you know, there was a lot of money spent in trying to truly figure out if we could make a light rail system happen. And when you think about it this way. You know, sometimes we're over here at home, you know, with our, you know, families, you know, it could be parents, it could be our kids, just trying to get the home in order, right? And you're just trying to keep the home going, and, you know, sometimes there's disagreement, okay? Well, let's you know, make it a big picture situation between whole counties and planners and mayors and elected officials and city staff. And then when you talk about light rail, building out new tracks in the ground, okay, having to build new tracks between communities and all the various residents or business owners who could be impacted, affected by those new tracks. In other words, I think what I'm trying to paint a picture on in 30 seconds or less, I'm going to hand it back. Please. What I'm trying to paint a picture on, and this is something that I think, if I'm not mistaken, our panelists, you know, spoke to earlier. You know, it does start to get complex. So that's why we invest money in engineers and professionals who can take the time to communicate, engage, and study the feasibility, like the possibility of making these systems happen. And the truth of it is, after a lot of money and time and energy spent in 2019, just before the pandemic, in 2019, you know, between Durham and Orange County, it was determined, you know what? Not today. Not today. This ain't it. This light rail system is not going to happen. But guess what? Guess what? Guess what? Guess what? Wake County, all right, said, you know what? We see you, Durham. We see you, Orange, putting the kibosh on the light rail. But we had a plan B this whole time called commuter rail. Now, you might say to yourself, Neptune, what's the difference between light rail and commuter rail? Well, I'll just tell you in 30 seconds. The real difference is light rail, new tracks in the ground. Commuter rail, the tracks are already in the ground. They're already there. They've been there for 100 years. Go talk to the North Carolina Railroad Association, and they'll say, oh yeah, we got tracks. We got tracks for days. So in all seriousness, to put it briefly, and I know Ms. Stokes will correct me, okay. To put it briefly, Wake County, Johnson County, Durham County, we are now heavily engaged in a conversation about Plan B, commuter rail, between Durham, Cary, RTP, all the way out to Johnson County, talking about trying to make a commuter rail option happen. But here again, to the point made earlier, you know, why does it take so long? Why does it take so much time? We know we needed this 10 years ago. Well, you got a lot of stakeholders at play. Again, from residents, whether it be homeowners, renters, business owners, whole counties, cities. I mean, think of it. You're trying to get a lot of people on board, right, and coordinating between communities to make a system happen. So it does take time. But here's what I'm grateful for, is that there are a lot of people along the way asking the right questions, especially in Durham. In Durham, they're asking a lot of questions because Durham put up a lot of money on that light rail system, on that light rail study. So to the question asked at the beginning, what do we do? What do we do? How do we participate in this process? Well, let me tell you something. Durham County Commissioners, they're responding to their residents. Durham County Commissioners are hearing loudly and clearly from their residents. Why are we even talking about light rail when we have a bus system that's barely functional? Why are we talking about light rail when we barely have sidewalks and bike lanes connecting our neighborhoods to, you know, the city? In other words, Durham County Commissioners are responding to their residents and to their voters. In other words, it's back on you. it's on us. It's on us to connect with each other. It's on us to connect with those who want to represent us. I see you, Dr. Ruth. I see you. In all seriousness, it's on us to connect with those who are seeking to represent our interests, to relate to them, well, you know, I hear you talking about this long-range plan, and it sounds good on paper, but what are we doing to make it happen? You know what I'm saying? And in all seriousness. And so Durham County Commissioners, they're all about commuter rail. But they're trying to make commuter rail happen while also making investments back in buses, back in sidewalks, back in bike lane. In other words, you know, making investments in better connecting communities to opportunity today, right, while we try to move forward tomorrow. Now, Wake County Commissioners, they're all in on commuter rail. Johnson County, all in on commuter rail. So we're all in, and we're gonna see it through. Hope, God willing, between now and 2032. All right, I'm gonna hand it off back to the panel. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you.
All right.
Encouraging.
I think we have time for one more.
Nick's going to be a hard act to follow, but I'd like to propose a Plan C to his Plans A and B,
Please don't bring
and
up
talk
light rail.
about solutions that I always think of when I hear commuter rail or light rail as a solution. I'm thinking these are 19th century solutions that are going to be leapfrogged by technologies that are in the works right now, like smart roads, self-driving cars, car trains. I don't know if any of you have heard of those, but I haven't heard any talk of those here tonight. Maybe these technologies could be combined with light rail, but I'd like to hear if anybody else is thinking about those things.
I personally think that we need the type of transportation system that can move a lot of people in a smaller amount of space. You were talking about the surface parking lot problem, right? So even if you have an autonomous car that's going to drop you off where you're going, even if it's all electric and it doesn't have tailpipe emissions, it still has to park somewhere. Or what's probably going to happen a lot too is that those cars are going to circulate. So you're going to go to dinner, the car's going to drop you off, and it's going to circulate the city. So it's not a magic solution. And I think that we need the compactness of putting people on bus rapid transit or on rail so that we can get a lot of people in a smaller space. We don't have the parking problems. We don't have the circulator problems.
Rail doesn't take you where you want to go. Rail takes you to a rail station, and then you have to get the
Yeah.
to go somehow.
Yeah, so we also need a better land use pattern, and there's a lot of rezoning that's happening along with these projects. So they're rezoning the areas to have transit-oriented development to get things closer to the station areas. There's also a lot of first mile, last mile connections. I also think when we talk about transportation, we're back to it's a system, right? And there's a complexity to it, and I don't think we expect that we're gonna have a transportation mode that's gonna suit absolutely everybody. So even if you're not a fan of rail and you don't want to ride rail or you don't want to ride the bus, investing in those modes of transportation still benefits you as a driver because it gets other cars off the road. If you make it easier for those people to make the choice to be in the bus, to be on the train, it's going to make your commute easier as a driver, whether you're in an autonomous vehicle in 20 years or your normal car today. And I think we need to think big with those types of infrastructure projects because we have way more people today than we had yesterday, and we're going to have way more people in the future here. The growth is just happening, and we don't have space on the roads for cars for everybody, so we need a different type of solution.
So I do hate to do that. Oh God. I do hate to do this, but we do need to wrap this up. One more time, round of applause for all of our panelists.
Enjoy getting
And also for our moderator, Jake Heffington, with
Jake.
Diversify Architecture. So I just want to thank you guys for coming again tonight. This is, as a reminder, or if you weren't here last night, this is night 2 out of 7. So the conversation still is not ending tonight. We're still going for another several days. As we wrap up, just a few announcements. We do have our third night on Wednesday night. It starts at 7, doors at 6. It will be led with a pre-reception by Women in Architecture, which is a local AIA-run organization. Wanted to give a few shout-outs tonight. Wanted to thank, she's in the room in the back, sitting at the bar, Jen Truman, give a wave. She ran, I'm hoping you'll say hello to her as you walk out or visit her by her poster board that she was working in the lobby. She is running for city council. I'm not going to screw this up. Group D this fall. So I hope you have a conversation with her as you walk out. She's asking you, or she's polling all of us to ask, what do we think could be designed better in Raleigh? Those questions and answers and conversations are all going to be incorporated into work that our students are doing in the workshop over the 2 weeks. And then one final announcement. We didn't say this last night, but we will be having a First Friday event 2 weeks Friday at the Work Hall, which is 213 Fayetteville Street. It's above Foundation Bar. I saw Vince and Will in here somewhere. They can really tell you where it is. And we would love to see you there to see those proposals in action. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. Please buy a drink after we're wrapped up here. Come ask another question if you didn't get a chance to ask it, and talk to all these folks. Thank you so much. Good night.
Jesse Pearson? I don't think so.
Hello, how are you? Good, thank you. I'm glad that we were able to be here tonight. Where are you from? Oh, okay. Okay. Hi, thank you for that great question.
I'm Tina Gavan. My kids campaign for your dad.
If I don't see you, great to meet you.
Thank you, good to meet you too.
I wish we had a better, more diverse range of questions.
That's okay. I know, it was a transit night, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was a transit crowd, but you know, you never know, and that was good, and Anna handled everything well.